Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to the session on common mistakes in critical reasoning. My name is Reza Sudana. One of the co-founders of e-GMAT, and I'm going to be your host today. First things first, I know we still have about a minute before the, the the YouTube live session formally starts. So I want to make sure that we're all set up properly and that you guys can hear me loud and clear. So if you guys can let me know if you can hear me loud and clear, that'd be great. Again, we still have about 40 seconds or so before the webinar or the YouTube live session formally starts. So if you can type in yes, or you can say, yeah, I can hear you, that'd be great. That'd be good feedback, and that'll ensure that we get started on time. Also, I want to thank many of you who are waiting in anticipation. I saw about 35 of you were there um, in the webinar. Okay, with that, it's 9 a.m. my time. Let me start sharing my screen, and you should now be able to see my screen as well. So the topic of this webinar is common mistakes in critical reasoning. In this webinar, we're going to look at a few common mistakes, or rather, in overall, I focus on three. So we're going to look at three common mistakes that you guys usually make while solving critical reasoning questions. So what we've done in this webinar is collected 5 questions, and we'll do those questions in essentially 2 sprints. So in sprint 1, we're going to solve 2 questions. I'm going to give you those questions, and you're going to answer them. Now, make sure you put your answers in polls. I would be sharing polls over here, and then we're going to discuss those 2 questions. We're going to take those learnings from these 2 questions, and then we're going to apply them to sprint 2, where we'll have 3 questions over here. Again, we'll respond to these questions in polls. That way, we're not influenced by what others think, and we truly get feedback that's helpful to us. And again, we're going to look at learnings as well. And then from here on, I'm going to talk about, hey, if you want to learn more, if you want to figure out how to address the areas where you still make mistakes, what can you do, where can you go, and so on and so forth. Now, these 5 questions, which I'm going to cover across print 1 and 2, so there'll be about 5 questions over here. They are challenging questions. These are questions that that essentially are in that 700 level. Mic volume. How many of you want me to increase the mic volume? Just because I think most of you can hear me just fine. And I can see if it's easy enough for me to do that. So yeah, I'm gonna try and speak louder, which people tell me I'm already quite loud overall. Okay, let's see if how can I do that. Let's get to audio and see if I can increase the volume over here. Just 1 second, guys. I'll have to essentially change my sharing mode, and just give me 1 second while I do that. Let's do that. I think the levels that I can really see are the loudest that I have over here. Let's check 1 more second. How about now? Is the volume better? How about now? I think it should be pretty good now. All right. Let's just go back into the slideshow mode, and let's go back and do that. Well, anything for you guys. Anything that we can do within reasonable limits, we'd always be happy to do that. So again, the 3 mistakes that people usually make in critical reasoning. So the first is people read the conclusion, they don't completely understand the conclusion in the context of the argument. And so we're going to look at questions which focus primarily on this, which simulate your confusions around understanding the conclusion. So that's going to be number one. The second is, even when you understand the conclusion, you fail to understand the precise logic that that the author uses to arrive at the conclusion. So, which is what we call as the argument structure over here. And then, if you understand the conclusion well, if you understand the argument structure, sometimes it does so happen that you are unable to simplify and understand what the answer choice is trying to say, and hence you make mistakes. Now, these three mistakes are in progressive order. For example, hey, if you don't understand the conclusion, then this and this don't matter. If you don't understand the argument structure, then this doesn't matter over here. So I mean, you first need to get better at understanding the conclusion, then the argument structure, and then I think the answer choices matter, more or less, in most cases. Now, for those of you who want to understand, okay, how do you build that capability from scratch? We have a webinar which starts from the very foundation and then goes till the end. That webinar is this weekend. You can click on that. You can click on this link over here and register for this particular webinar. Okay. With that, let's kind of go. Let's go into sprint one, and in sprint one, we're going to solve two questions, and 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 again, remember, we're going to solve these questions in polls. Let's go back. We're going to solve them in polls. So please don't put your answers in there. Put your answers just in polls overall. So with that, let me get the first poll. And I'm going to share that in StreamYard. Here is the first poll. The entire question is in poll, so you should be able to look at that as well. You shouldn't need to look at the YouTube window. You should be able to just solve the question from the poll itself. I'm going to give you guys about 2.5 minutes to get to the answer. All right, guys, another 45 seconds. Let's get those answers in. you can put see the option in the poll itself. So, and Ajinkya, please don't put your responses here. So, Krupa. So, if you click on the poll, you should be able to see the options over there. You don't need to see the options over here. I'm going to hide this. So Monica and Divyansh, you may put you may see all the options right over there. I have 27 responses, 28 responses. It's been 3 minutes. I want to give you another 5 seconds to get to put in your response over here. 3, 2, and 1. Okay, now this is an official question. Many of you have seen this before, and I could really see with as I saw the pace at which answers were coming. There are about 12 of you who answered this question in about 30 seconds, and you got all of them got it right. And there's no way you can do this in 30 seconds. So just to make sure whether you are able to understand the intent of this argument, I've created 2 additional answer choices, and I want you to tell me. I'm going to share another poll, exact same argument. Here's another poll that I'm going to share, and I want you to tell me what do you think about these 2 answer choices. And you have 4 options here. You have 2 options really include the answer choices. The other 2 options say both of them are correct or neither of them is correct. So same argument, same question, different options. Let's see how you do for this one. Harsha, if you were here, if you could please share this question, the additional option questions with me so that I can see the starts for that one. Okay, let's see that. All right. I'm going to show this one for those of you who've not gotten this. All right, I have 27 responses to that one as well. And all right, and it paints a picture. Your responses over here paint a picture. So let's move forward. I'm going to give you another 10 seconds to respond to this one, and then we will move forward. I have 100+ students here. I would appreciate if I can get more responses in the poll. That way, each one of you gets feedback. All right. So with that, we're going to solve our second question of the day. Let's just get to the second question for sprint 1, and then we'll discuss each of these questions. So here is our second question. It's called Lights Food. Here is the poll for that, for question 2. And I'm going to show it on the screen as well. So you can click at the poll on the screen or click at the poll in the chat. And let me start my stopwatch again. Mohit, click on the poll and all the options are there in the poll. You shouldn't have to look at the screen. So yeah. All right, 23 responses, 25 responses, last 10 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. All right, so let's go forward. I'm gonna put my camera over here. Let's kind of look at the accuracies. 49 responses. So for the second question, our accuracy was, for the second question, let's just do, our accuracy is about 45% overall. So that was our accuracy for the first question. The accuracy, let's get to that. Fair Trade Coffee. Was also about 46%. Now, for the question that I shared, which was question 1.5, which was the additional options, my accuracy over here was, how many of you got it right? So that's about 6 out of 46. So that's about 15%, give or take. So for the second, for the two additional option choices, 15% of you got it right. So these were brand new options. You won't find them anywhere. These were options that I had created, and 15% of you got it right. So for those of you really saying we can't see option E, you're not required to see option E on the screen. The forms have, these forms have all the options in there. So don't worry about reading anything off the screen while I share the form. So Vinayak, Ishita, is that clear? Perfect. So, but once again, both these questions, difficult questions, you can see them by accuracies, 40, mid 40s. And as for the additional options, the accuracies dropped even more. So let's move forward. So the first thing you've got to do in an evaluate question is to figure out which statement is my main conclusion. And to do that, let's kind of put in another poll. I love polls that they give me data. They give you feedback. So I want you to tell me which statement over here, according to you, is the main conclusion. So here is another poll for that. Which statement is the main conclusion? Let's get a few more responses. I can see about 10 responses in there. The question is, which statement is the main conclusion? Okay, that's good. 25 responses. 27, 3, 2, and 1. From a percentage standpoint, or rather, I'm just going to put absolute numbers in there. I'm sure many of you are quant whizzes. You guys can really figure out overall. So 15 of you have chosen option B. Okay. Let me. 4 of you have chosen option A. 4 of you have chosen option C, and then another 16 have chosen option D. So this number, as I'm doing, is increasing, has gone up to 18 right now. The correct option over here, and this is feedback. This is really valuable feedback for you guys, because this tells you where is it that you're faltering. Um, so the correct answer is option 2 over here, or option B, that this practice hurts more farmers in developing nations than it helps. Now, for those of you who understand what a main conclusion is, how do you figure out the main conclusion, or what question do you ask to determine which statement is the main conclusion? Can you write that in the chat pod? How do you figure out that, or how did you come to selecting choice 2, that this particular statement is indeed your main conclusion? What is that litmus test that you ask yourself? Let's see a few responses. So the main conclusion is always what the author of the argument is trying to assert. In this case, what the author is trying to make you believe, or is trying to assert, is to really say that this practice of fair trade coffee over here, which is coffee that has the fair trade logo, it hurts more farmers in developing countries than it helps. And if you want to kind of visualize this piece over here, so therefore test, but test, I think those are keywords. Okay, but what the question that you want to ask yourself is, what does the author want you to believe? So author of the argument, what does he want you to believe? What does he want to assert? What is it trying to prove? That's what you need to ask, and the answer to that question will give you that statement. That is the main conclusion, and that's true for any kind of argument based questions, whether it's strengthen, weaken, evaluate, boldface, assumption, logically completes, and so on and so forth. So any question where there's an argument, there has to be a conclusion. If there has to be a conclusion, that conclusion will be whatever the author is trying to assert. Okay, so what is the author really saying? So once the first step is identify the main conclusion, the second step is visualize that conclusion. That's just focus on it and really just visualize that conclusion as to what is the content of that conclusion. So let's just focus on this particular statement over here, and I'm going to erase some of these things. And what the author is saying is this practice of fair trade coffee, so let's call it FTC, it hurts more farmers in developing nations than it helps. The first thing is we are worried about developing nations over here. Okay, so it says it hurts more farmers. So let's assume in developing nations, so DN, there are 100 farmers. I always love 100 because it's a nice round number. It's easy to visualize. And what it's saying is, out of these 100, it seems to hurt. So this is the hurt bracket, and not hurt. And what the author is claiming is that it seems to hurt 60 out of those 100, and not hurt is the remaining 40. So it hurts more farmers than it helps. Is that clear? Just the visualization of this piece over here. In developing nations, there are 100 farmers, it hurts 60, and it doesn't hurt the other 40. And let's kind of look at this as to why do we say that, and this is what we call as a logical structure. And to understand, once we've understood the conclusion, let's now build the logical structure starting from the information that's given to us. So what is happening? We've had this fair trade coffee for which we charge a higher price. It increases the average, and because we charge a higher price, it increases the average price of coffee. Because of this increase, more and more people start to produce coffee, which leads to this increase in demand, increase in supply, and the supply overstrips demand. Now, based on this, the author says, hey, by raising prices for coffee, so there's more supply, this lowers prices for non-fair trade. So we're not talking about the entity that we were talking about earlier, which was fair trade coffee. We're talking about a second entity over here. This is a type of argument where we're comparing two entities. And so for people who don't produce fair trade, so non-fair trade coffee, they're forced to reduce their price. Because why? Because now there is this supply over here, and hence they make a lower profit. So this should be lower, not lesser, because profit is countable. And based on this, the author makes his conclusion that this practice hurts more farmers than it helps overall. Okay. So logical structure, is that clear? Those at a very high level, is the logical structure absolutely clear? Okay. Now, one of the things that we do, and which is something that we teach, is what we call as creating a falsification question for this, to really say, hey, we do pre-thinking to figure out, and in what ways was this conclusion not be true? That's what we call as the falsification question. So we look at these two entities. We have a fair trade farmer. We have a farmer that produces non-fair trade coffee. The question that we ask is, hey, in what scenario will paying extra for fair trade coffee not hurt more farmers than it helps? So in what scenario will this conclusion break down? Or falsification is also being called as a breakdown. So in what scenario will paying extra for fair trade coffee not hurt more farmers than it helps? Let's kind of figure out what are all those scenarios. So what if there are more farmers who sell fair trade coffee than who sell non-fair trade coffee in developing countries? So remember, we had that number 100. What if 70 of them sell fair trade coffee, for which they get a higher price, and the other 30 are non-fair trade NFT? And if that's the case, then the author cannot say this, that paying extra for this fair trade coffee will hurt more farmers. Remember, this more is a comparative word over here. Okay, so if that's the case, then what's my assumption? That the proportion of non-fair trade farmers is greater than, let me just erase this part over here, than that of fair trade farmers. That's kind of what is really important over here. That's what the author assumes while making this claim, that paying extra for fair trade coffee hurts more farmers. And what we have to evaluate is just ask this question: hey, what's the proportion of fair trade farmers versus non-fair trade farmers? And which is where choice B is my correct answer over here. Okay, now let's look at the option choices that you guys put in over here, which were the other popular option choices that you guys chose for this particular question in this case. All right, I'm going to look at option A was very popular. About half of you chose option B, which is 50% of you, 47, 48. Option A and option E were very popular. So let's kind of focus on options A and E. Now, I need feedback from you guys. Why don't you tell me, what does can I please repeat the falsification scenario again? Yes, I can repeat. So the falsification scenario is, and again, the pre-thinking webinar explains how to build these scenarios in great detail. That's the only thing that we focus on. So the falsification scenario says, in what scenario will paying extra for this fair trade coffee not hurt more farmers than it helps? Now remember, it's not really saying not hurt any farmers. It's saying it'll not. In what scenario will it not hurt more farmers? Because you had a comparative term in the conclusion, you have a comparative term in the falsification question. And I'm going to share this PDF. Okay, now let's focus on choice A. Choice A was popular, choice D was popular, and choice E was popular as well. So what does choice A talk about? Choice A says whether there's a way of alleviating the impact of increased average prices on non-fair trade coffee. So what it's really saying, if you think about it, is what it's saying is, hey, is there a way? Can I take some actions to alleviate the pain of non-fair trade farmers? Okay, is there something that I can do? Now, what is the conclusion talking about? The conclusion is not really saying whether you can do something or not. What the conclusion is saying is, given the current scenario, is the practice of fair trade hurting more farmers in developing countries than it's helping? So really, when you look at choice, say, and you really say, hey, evaluate it in the context of what's given, you'd say this is completely irrelevant. Why? Because the conclusion is not really saying what can you do. What it's saying is, given the current scenario, let's figure out whether the practice of fair trade is helping or not. And because of this, I just reject this answer choice. For those of you who chose choice A, is that clear? And even for those of you who rejected choice A, is the reasoning more clear in your mind? For those of you who either chose or who rejected choice A. Okay, and again, you can really see the reasoning over here. It's not about whether this impact can be reduced. It is how is how many farmers are impacted and the proportion overall. Let's look at choice C. Okay, choice C is saying whether many coffee farmers derive income from other kind of farming. It's not relevant, so let's not worry about it. Okay. Let's look at choice D. Choice D was popular as well. Choice D says whether consumers should pay for extra fair trade coffee if doing so lowers the profits. Do we care about whether consumers should pay or not? Is that anything? Is that of relevance to the conclusion? So this is not relevant to my conclusion at all, because of which, this option choice is wrong over here. Okay, again, remember, if you just understood the conclusion, you would have learned the impact of this. All right, let's look at choice E. Choice E says how fair trade coffee in farmers in developing nations could be helped without lowering profits for non-fair trade. Again, this is along the lines of choice A. Choice A really says whether there is a way of alleviating the impact on NFT, non-fair trade group. This choice E really says how can we help them. Okay, again, it's irrelevant. The argument is really saying is, what is the situation now? Is the practice of fair trade helping more farmers in developing nations than it's hurting? That's all there is. How we can help them is completely irrelevant. Okay, if you did a project and if your boss is evaluating, hey, whether you did the project well, he's not going to worry about how can the current state of project be improved. He's evaluating what has happened till that particular point in time when he starts to evaluate, not what can be done from this point on. Okay, so for those of you who chose choice E, because choices A and E were quite popular, is that clear why these choices are not relevant to the argument in question? Is that clear? Okay. So for those of you who made a mistake on this one, why did you make a mistake? Let's kind of get some feedback in here. Why did you make a mistake? Where did your thinking go wrong? Where did your overall thought process force you to choose one of the incorrect answer choices? Or in other words, what feedback are you going to give to yourself to avoid making the same mistake? Again, remember, you're not here just to solve questions. You are here to make sure that you get to that next level so that you don't repeat the same mistakes. For those of you who made the mistake, where did you make a mistake? I'm not seeing a lot of text come through. Okay. Let's go over here. So need to practice more. Okay. You derived the wrong conclusion, as you said. Need to practice more in order to find. ID the conclusion, find the conclusion properly. Do not think of how this can be improved, rather evaluate the situation. Good. Got the conclusion wrong. Again, you can really see how these practices make you, or these three mistakes enable you to, or rather force you to mark the wrong answer. Okay. So again, the key thing which is there when you look at this conclusion is to really focus on, this conclusion talks about farmers. Other entities are irrelevant. Okay. The second thing which is there is the conclusion had a comparison in there. This is of an argument type, which is what we call as two entities. For those of you who are e-GMAT students, for those of you, in fact, if you're not even e-GMAT students, if you register for the free webinar this weekend, you'd get an entire set of video with 10 plus examples on how do you tackle argument with two entities in there. Okay, and because with two entities, you would see comparisons in the conclusion. And once your brain starts to get to identify those such comparisons, you will be able to spot them. You would be able to really just reject irrelevant answer choices, and you'd be able to answer questions quickly. Why? Because if your brain can spot them quickly, you can answer them quickly. So if you've not registered for the free session this weekend, do register for the same over here. This is the link to our free session this weekend. And again, the third thing which is there is this talks about the current state of affairs. Any future actions are irrelevant. Okay, so that's something which is really important. All right, with that, let's move forward and let's look at the additional answer choices that we had put in over here. Now, tell me this. If I told you that 100 farmers were, and these are the two additional answer choices that were there. If I told you that 100 farmers were impacted were helped by fair trade coffee, what would happen to the conclusion? Will your increase in conclusion, will your belief in conclusion go up, go down, or not change? So what would happen to the conclusion? Will you increase in, would you believe the conclusion more? Would you believe the conclusion less? Or will there be no change? Can you guys tell me? Will you increase the more, less, or no change? No change, right? It will not change. Why? Because we don't know how many non-fair trade NFT. We don't know that. And because we don't know how does that 100 compare to the number for NFT, so this would be the correct part. Now, if it's no change, then what does this do can this be the correct answer? Absolutely not. Why? Because it doesn't do anything to further my belief or reduce my belief in the conclusion. All right, so this is not the correct answer. This will not be the correct answer. Okay, let's look at choice B over here, the second choice that I made. Whether the overall profit posted by farmers was higher after the fair trade pricing was put in place. Okay, and Devyansh, thank you for that wonderful explanation. Let's look at choice B. So if the answer to that is, so let's say the overall profit was higher or was lower or was no change. Now, will that, and this is the more challenging answer choice. So what would this do to your belief in the conclusion? And the conclusion is, has this practice hurt more farmers than it has helped? The conclusion is that. So if you look at the overall profit, can you draw anything conclusively about whether it has hurt more farmers or whether it has helped more farmers? Can you do that? Can you draw anything conclusive out of it? Again, of no use. Yes, Shreyans, I love how you guys are coming up with these answers. The answer again is of yeah, and Ajinkya is now getting there. Okay. Now, can you really see when you delve into the conclusion, once you understand that conclusion really well, how you can look at these answer choices and reject them with confidence, with solid reasoning. This is a state that you want to get into. Okay. And again, you can, it's the clarity of thought, it's a visualization that needs to happen in your brain if you want to hit that 90th percentile in critical reasoning, if you want to get to that 750 760 score on the GMAT. It's that level of clarity that I want you to get to. So let's get to a second question, which is diets food. This is a very, very interesting question. It's again a difficult question, and one thing that I would really say over here is that when you solve questions over here, you're not here to get all of them right. You are here to learn. So when you solve them correctly, make sure you solve them for the correct reasons. When you make mistakes, make sure you understand why you made a mistake so that you don't repeat that mistake again. So what does a weakener do? A weakener, before I go in there, okay, I want to make sure you guys understand this. A weakener provides new information, which means information that cannot be inferred from the argument, and which, when combined with the information provided in the argument, so which in light of the information provided, which means when you combine this with the information in the argument, reduces your belief in the conclusion. And who are you? You are an independent evaluator. So if you really say, hey, after looking at this new information, I don't believe in the conclusion as much as I did prior to looking at it, then that's the correct weakener. That's the option that you're looking for. Okay. So with that in mind, let's just take a look at what this argument is doing. So for Diets Food, a year ago, again, there's a timeline piece over here. A year ago, Diets Food launched a year-long advertising campaign for its canned tuna. I'm going to actually remove my video over here so that I think the text becomes slightly more clear for you guys if I remove my video. So a year ago, Diets Food, this particular company launched this advertising campaign, and last year it sold 12 million cans of tuna compared to, again, you can see a comparison over here. It's not two entities, it's a comparison of the same entity across a timeline compared to 10 million sold in the previous year. So this really just says, hey, there was an increase of 2 million units of canned tuna sold. And then it further really says there's a comma and then there's a phrase over here, an increase directly attributable to new customers brought in by the campaigns. You say, hey, this increase is, you can directly attribute, there's a conclusive evidence that it's attributable to the new customers brought in by the campaign. So don't question this is a fact. Then it goes on to really say, hey, profit from the additional sales, and for simplification we have put in this additional sales to be just 2 million because that's what it seems to be right now. Profits were substantially less than the cost of the advertising campaign. So if we look at this, you say, hey, if the advertising campaign cost 1.9 million, the profits that came from this were substantially less than that. So the revenue that it brought in was probably 2 million, and the profits correspondingly, so 1.9 million. So revenue minus cost is the profits, which is where you really see the profits to be about 0.1 million. And based on this, the author concludes, the conclusion is very clear. Clearly, the campaign, therefore, did nothing to further Diet's economic interests. Okay. So what's the conclusion? And again, remember, there's this word which is economic interests over here, which is that's a fairly heavy word. But essentially, in simple terms, what it's saying is that this campaign did very little to essentially benefit Diets. Okay. What is the logic? The logic is, even though there was some additional revenue, the cost was way higher than the incremental profit. It shouldn't be revenue, profit brought in by the campaign. So hence there was very little incremental benefit out of this. Now we're going to follow the same process that we did last time. We're going to really say, Hey, what's the Wigner framework? What new information will help us believe less in the conclusion above? So there are some ways in which we could break the conclusion. You could say some ways in which, despite the information that's given to me, and again, remember this, you always ask this, despite the information that's given to me, how can this conclusion be falsified? So despite the cost being way high than the incremental profits, how could I really say that this really truly did add to the economic well-being of this particular company? So there are two scenarios. We really look at conditions or scenarios in which this were the case. So what if this 2 million incremental 2 million cans is not 2 million, it's 3 million? Okay, what if without the ad campaign, they would have sold less than the 10 million cans that were given to us? But the second thing is, what if these customers, once they acquire a taste, they become repeat customers, they continue to buy again and again? In either of the cases, you can't really say that hey, ad campaign did nothing to to further Diet's economic interest. So quick poll. I know this one is there in the answer choices. How many of you actually were able to think about this scenario, repeat customers? How many of you were able to think about this scenario over here? Let's get some responses. Okay, so what are the corresponding to each of these falsification conditions? You can create two Wigners. One is, hey, the industry is declining, so without the advertising it would have been way less than 10 million units. And the second Wigner is if there was an option that says the customers acquired through this campaign were become repeat customers, so which means their profits are not just limited to the profits that you got this year, but next year, the year after, and for the next foreseeable future. Okay, so let's look at the various options. I'm going to look at how you guys polled over here in this one. We got 61 responses. Choice A, about 9 of you chose. Okay. Choice E, which was the correct answer, 24 of you chose choice E. 5 of you chose choice D. 16 of you chose choice C, which was very surprising, and 7 of you chose choice B. All right, with that, let's go forward and evaluate this over here. Okay, a few of you were able to do this. I could really see that many of you were able to find the second scenario, but then you were looking for it. That's good. So whether the sales of canned tuna account for a small or a large percentage, again, remember, it's a comparative term that I'm using over here, is irrelevant to whether this particular campaign furthered their economic interests. Even if it accounts for 1% of the sale, the question that we're trying to do is we are evaluating this particular campaign and to really say, was this campaign beneficial? And this is frankly for those of you who want to go into any sort of product development or frankly any initiative. As an MBA, this is one big evaluation that you would do regardless of what function you go in. Okay, choice B is written along the lines of the second piece over there, but it doesn't go there, and it's written to confuse you. And I'm glad that only 7 of you chose choice B. Choice B says, and actually it's along the lines, but it's not the same, says most of these new customers who bought tuna for the first time were already loyal customers of another product. So essentially, but it doesn't really go further on to say they're going to buy tuna again, or essentially that it brings in any benefit. It just characterizes who came in, and again, because of this, it's not a weakener. And actually, for me, this is again irrelevant to my belief in the conclusion, or it doesn't go. It doesn't reduce my belief. It doesn't further my belief, is what I would say. Choice C really says a what if scenario. This is what I call as a what if choice. What it says is a less expensive campaign, and again, comparative choices become difficult. A less expensive campaign would have brought in fewer new customers than did the campaign at launch last year. So say, hey, have they spent, a third the amount would have gotten significantly fewer customers, and which is kind of understandable. You spend less money, you get fewer customers. Does it give you any new information? Does it tell you about whether it furthered the economic interest? No. Remember, the basis of economic interest is the increased revenue versus the cost, increased cost. What this is saying is, hey, if the cost were lower, the revenue would also be lower as well. But it doesn't compare revenue versus cost, and which is what the basis of the conclusion is. Okay. Um, so also we're looking for this particular campaign. We're not looking at what would have happened as the explanation says. So again, what would have happened is irrelevant. You look at this conclusion, you look at prior conclusion, you look at the incorrect answer choices. Can you see a pattern of what's confusing you? This one, again, you were confused with what would have happened, where the conclusion is asking you to figure out, hey, whether what was done, whether that was beneficial. So for those of you who made a mistake in question one, probably a good chunk of you also made a mistake and chose choice C over here, because this answer choice is along the same lines. Okay. Whether it made money or not, again, is irrelevant, because the money could be made using from the original sales too. Okay. Choice E, which is along the lines of a first weakener, really just says, hey, this, what it says is, hey, the increment is not just 2 million cans, it's actually more, because based on the industry stats, what we can really say is, had this campaign not been launched, we wouldn't have even had that 10 million canned units. Okay. So what did we learn from this one? What did we learn from this? Before we go into sprint 2, what are we going to do differently in sprint 2 over here? Tell me, what are we going to do differently in sprint 2? Because we have 3 more questions there. We'll probably get time to solve 2 of them, or discuss 2 of them. We'll solve all 3. I'm going to share the PDF. And by the way, I want to thank GMAT Club for organizing this YouTube live sessions. It allows us an opportunity to interact with you guys. It allows you an opportunity to know more about us. So I think it's really important for us to express our appreciation over there. Also, if you like the session, you can press on the like button. But so I truly appreciate that. It gives me feedback that you guys are able to understand what we're talking about over here, and you're able to benefit from it. Okay, Jose says, be aware of the trap answers. Other learnings so far. Again, remember, you could see the commonality in incorrect answer choices across over here. How many of you want to go to sprint 2? And how many of you are scared of sprint 2? Simple question. How many of you want to go to sprint 2? Okay. Let's get a few more inputs. Let's do it. Bring it on. Okay. I like that. So let's do sprint 2. Here is your first question for sprint 2. And here is the question. Here is the poll. Again, you don't have to worry about the question on the screen. I'm going to show it over here. Everything's there in the poll. So yeah, I'm going to mute myself. You guys will get about 3 minutes to get this one right. Okay, I have another, you have another 40 seconds to put your answers in. Already seeing good answers come in. That's great. Last 15 seconds. Let's get those answers in. 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Okay, we are in the next print over here. I'm going to hide this one. We're going to go to the next question over here. Here is the poll for the next question. I'm going to show this. All right, good luck, guys. Okay, last 30 seconds. Let's get those answers in. 15. Let's get those answers in. Five seconds, guys. 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. All right, let's move on to the next question. This is going to be our last question for the day. Then we go into our discussion mode. Here is the link to the poll. Excuse me. Okay, last 20 seconds. Let's get those answers in, guys. Twenty responses so far. 3, 2, and 1. So let's end the poll, and I'm going to hide this one over here. So let's discuss this. How are these questions? Let me just bring in my cam over here. So how are these questions? Rohit says I hate boldface in CR. Okay. Rohit, take a look at the videos that we have in our free trial. You would love those. I mean, I absolutely love boldface questions. I think, in my opinion, they are one of the easiest questions to get right once you kind of reach a certain level, and B, the more you do boldface questions, they have a certain inherent beauty and in them. And the moment you're able to do boldface questions, you build that understanding of the overall structure of the argument, and this allows you to solve other questions very easily, because really getting to that argument structure, the second mistake that we talked about, so it takes care of one and two both. So to solve boldface questions, you need to understand the conclusion. So the first thing is you need to do is understand the conclusion, and the second thing you need to do is you understand the structure. And if you're able to do boldface questions well, you'd be able to understand both the conclusion and structure. So that's something that you can be very certain. So they're all 700 level questions. They're all official questions. I wanted to use official questions over here so that the e-GMAT questions that you have are reserved for the course. So let's kind of look at this over here. So we're going to go through this. So the first, and we're going to go line by line. So Newton developed certain mathematical concepts. The first thing you do in board first questions is separate each of the statements, and you can really see this over here, which is step one, passage analysis. Separate each of the statements, put them in what we call as a fact versus a claim bucket overall. So Newton develops a certain mathematical context, concepts and techniques, and these techniques seem to be fundamental to calculus, and Leibniz developed something which was very similar. Okay, so this is the two facts over here, and then choice says it has traditionally been thought. The moment you see this, it has traditionally been thought overall. So what it means is that that essentially the author may not think that, but some people think that. Okay, so there's a belief over there, that there's a traditional belief that these discoveries were independent, and then you have this word however, that recently researchers have discovered notes of Leibniz, so some of those notes had discussed one of Newton's books on mathematics. So this part over here, this stuff from however to this part over here is a fact, and the first line over here, from here to here, this is a belief. This is a belief over here, which is what you see here. Okay, let me just erase this. Then the author tells us several scholars have argued that the book includes a presentation of Newton's concepts, and since the notes were written before his own development, so notes by Leibniz were written before the development of his own calculus concepts and techniques. So there's another fact which was there. It is virtually certain that the traditional view is false. What is the traditional view? That these discoveries were independent. So what they're really saying is it is virtually certain that this was false. Then the author says a more cautious approach conclusion, then this is called for, and then the author says Leibniz notes are limited to the early sections of Newton's books, sections that do not include where the parts where Newton developed calculus. Okay, now there are 6 statements here. I'm going to give you a poll, and I don't know, some of you are sick of my polls, but we love to collect data and we love to establish causality. I want you to tell me which of these statements, 6 statements, is the main conclusion. Here is a poll that's come up over here. I'm going to show that poll. I want you to tell me which of these statements is the main conclusion over here, or how's is the main conclusion. One to 6, which of these statements is the main conclusion? Let's get your responses in there. Which statement is the main conclusion? Oh, it's a wrong poll? No. Oh, not the... Hold on, sorry about that, guys. Let me see. Sorry about that. That is true, it was the wrong poll. Yes, here is the right link over here. My apologies. It should be showing up now. I think now it should be the right poll. If I understand, let me check at my end. Yeah, this is the right poll now. And I see responses as well. 10 responses, 13 responses. I like what I'm seeing right now. That's good. And I'm going to show you the data over here. 19. Let's get to 25 responses. Okay, 20. Let's get 5 more responses. 23. The question is, which statement is the main conclusion? 2 more responses. 24. And 1 more. So I'm going to start putting numbers in. 26 responses. That's good over here. So the 10 of you said choice. Statement number 5 is the main conclusion over here. 3 of you said this. 9 of you said statement 4. Okay. Then let's go in over here. Then let's go into 2 of you said this one, and then surprisingly 4 of you essentially said statement number 1. So let's look at which statement is your main conclusion. Okay. When you think about 4 and 5, I can understand the confusion between them. The question that you have to ask is, what does the author want you to believe? Which statement is the main conclusion? And when you look at this, this is what the author wants you to really believe. He says, it's virtually certain that the traditional view is false, but I want you to get to a more cautious conclusion. And it's splitting here between these two. But if you really just say, hey, what is the one thing that the author wants you to take away from this? This is what you would really just say. Okay. This is a claim that the author makes, so I can understand why this is fairly tempting. The first statement gives you the context. Okay. It's not a claim. Remember, a conclusion always has to be the claim. And the second one, there is a claim. There's a belief in supporting the main conclusion, and there's also the fact. Okay. Choice statement number 3 contains a fact which supports a claim, which is the claim goes against the main conclusion. That since the book includes blah 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 blah. Actually, this claim over here does not belong to the author. Who does this claim belong to? Shreyansh really says yes. Thank you, Shreyansh. So this belongs to the traditional scholars. Again, I think when you see too many windows over here, which is what I've been looking at data. So there is no splitting hairs, by the way. My apologies over here. Again, if you chose choice 4 over here as the main conclusion, then you again faltered on the fact that the main conclusion also only has to be from the author overall. And thank you, Shreyansh. And this part over here is the reasoning that is given to support the main conclusion overall. So for those of you who faltered over here, and a good chunk of you faltered here, can you guys see that why statement 5 is the main conclusion? So can you really see that, number 1? And then can you also kind of tell yourself why you faltered? Can you tell yourself that, why you faltered overall? Okay. All right. Yes, I will. Thank you about that. I'm going to remove the GMAT Club comment from the screen. Let's just hide this over here, over this. Okay. Thank you, Shreyansh. Thanks for that feedback overall. So let's look at the poll options here, and let me just get in the data that you guys have put in place. Question 3. Where is my form for question 3? Yeah, here is my form. So choice D is my correct answer, and 13 of you have chosen choice D. 10 of you have chosen choice C. Then 3, 3, and 9. So it's 3. Here's 3. Actually, let me just be a bit more legible over here. 3, 3, and 9 of you have chosen choice E. So let's kind of look at the various answer choices over here. So let's start with choice A, B, and C. Choice A, B, and C talk about a position that the historian defends. If you look at it over here, okay, is there a position that the historian is defending over here? Do you see a position defended by the historian in this particular argument? The answer to that is no. Let's look at one. Notes were boldface one is notes were written before Leibniz's own development of this thing. Several scholars have argued that the sense includes the presentation of Newton's calculus concepts and blah 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 blah. And since the notes were written before Leibniz develops its own calculus, it's virtually certain that the traditional view is false. Now, what the first choice A says is the first provides evidence, okay, in support of the overall position that the historian defends. The first question that I'm going to ask ourselves is there a position that the historian is trying to defend? The answer to that is no. If you look at what this argument is doing, what's the purpose of essentially writing this argument? It is to really just say, hey, the conclusion that historians are drawing out of this is not as certain. We need to really have a more cautious approach to this. And the moment I look at this, I really say this is wrong, and which is where I would really reject choices A, B, and C over there. Now, let's look at choice D over here. The first is evidence that has been used to support a conclusion, okay, that the historian criticizes. Okay, so the first is evidence. This is true. It has been used to support a conclusion. What conclusion is it used to support? It is virtually certain that the traditional view is false. And let me actually I'm going to remove my video so you guys can read this a bit more carefully. I can, at least on my screen, the font doesn't seem to come out as well. So this evidence is supporting this. This part is okay, and this conclusion is criticized by the historian. So when you look at this over here, you really see, okay, this is a three-dimensional, or this first part has three aspects to it. One is the first is evidence that has been used to support something. What? A conclusion. What kind of a conclusion? That the historian criticizes. Each of these three parts is correct. Okay. The second is evidence offered in support of the historian's own position. Okay. This part over here is used to support this. And let me just see if historian's own position over here, which is a more cautious conclusion. This is the historian's position, and this part essentially supports this. And because of this is correct, this is correct, of historian's own position. This is correct as well, which makes choice D the correct answer. Okay. The first is evidence. So choice E is a tempting choice. If we chose choice C, at least you got part of it right. The first is evidence. That part is correct. That has been used to support a conclusion. Okay, it does support a conclusion that the historian criticizes. That part is correct as well. So the first part of choice C is all correct. The second is additional. Further information means additional information that substantiates that evidence. So what it's saying is the second makes the first. Substantiates means makes it more believable, this particular evidence. Now, my question to you is, does the second make the first more believable? Absolutely wrong. Because of this part over here, choice E is incorrect. The first part of choice E is correct. The second part of choice E is incorrect. Now, one of the things when you look at this answer choice, you really see is um, it plays on two things. One is, what is the purpose of writing this argument? And if you think the purpose of writing this argument is that the historian is defending a position, again, the test makers are trying to trick you into thinking that. And if you understand the main conclusion properly, you would really figure out, hey, that's not the reason why the author is writing it. And the second is, how do these two statements interplay with one another? Again, it's the not just identifying the main conclusion, but also the structure of the overall argument. So with that, let's kind of go to the next one, the last question for the day. And the last question for the day is very interesting overall. Let me look at the poll results for this one and see how many of you got it right. I believe very few of you. This is an official question as well, overall. Okay. So this, I'm looking at your results over here, and actually many of you've gotten it wrong. So what's going on over here? So we're given an example of an animal, which is the bat, and it says a network of blood vessels in bats serve only. So this is a question in which keywords are very important. You're going to really see this word only twice over here. So networks of blood vessels in bats wings serve only to disperse heat generated in flight. So the reason why you have networks of blood vessels is to really make sure that, you know, when bats fly, they're able to disperse heat. The heat is generated only because the bats flap their wing, which means if they did not flap their wings, this heat would not be generated. All right. So then what's given? Thus, paleontologist, thus means, okay, there's a conclusion coming in, thus is your conclusion marker. Paleontologist's recent discovery that winged dinosaur, Sander Talus, I'm not going to pronounce it. Let's call him our good guy S. That the dinosaur S had a similar networks. So the paleontologist discovered that S had a similar network of blood vessels in the skin of its wings. And they say the conclusion that they're making is that this provides evidence that S flew by flapping its wings and not just by gliding. Now, the key question over here is, and this is where I think a lot of you have gotten confused. You've got to identify what is given to you and what is it that the question is asking. So can you just type in what is it that the question is asking and what is given to you? Because if you identify that, then coming to the correct answer becomes very easy. So let's make sure. I want you to tell me what is it that's given to you, and what is it that you have to figure out. So let's kind of start with, what is it that you have to prove, or what's the conclusion over here? What is the conclusion here? Can you type that in? And let me just go back to, given as S is similar to bats, Hemant, let's kind of get a few more responses. What is the conclusion here? Or rather, given is that the network of blood vessels in S is similar to that in bats. Okay. Yes. What's the conclusion is, and that's really important, is that S flew by flapping its wings and not just by gliding. So the thing that you have to identify over here is, we are not doubting whether S flew. We are not. What we are saying is how it flew, which was by flapping its wings. Okay, well, that's kind of the argument that we are making over here, and that's really important. And what's the logic over here? The reason why we are saying that is that the blood vessels network in S is similar to that in bats over here. And then we are given that in bats, the blood vessel network, it exists only, the reason that it exists is only for heat dispersal. And then this heat that we are trying to disperse over here is generated only by wings flapping for flying. Okay. Okay, based on this, what you're really saying is, hey, because we found the similar blood vessel network in S, it must fly by flapping its wings. Why? Because we have this parallel evidence in bats. So again, you ask the same falsification question. Say, in what scenario is a paleontologist's discovery not an evidence for the hypothesis that S flew by flapping its wings and not just by gliding? So you've discovered these blood vessels, but in what scenario can we not really say, based on this discovery, that S flew by flapping its wing? Or in what scenario can we really say that S actually flew by gliding rather than by flapping its wings? So that's the way to look at it. And let's kind of look at certain falsification scenarios. Okay, what if there is a completely different reason for these blood vessels? So we know it has blood vessels, but what if there's a purpose that we discover based on S's anatomy that justifies blood vessels for a reason other than flapping the wings, or for a reason other than heat dissipation? Okay, what if they're just there, they don't serve any actual purpose overall? Or what if there is evidence that can be put in which can tell us that flapping wings for S doesn't lead to any heat generation? What if there is no need to dissipate that heat overall? Now read these falsification conditions again. You can probably formulate a few more, but read these falsification conditions again and tell me, do they make sense? If the blood vessels have a completely different purpose, then my conclusion will break down. Okay, if blood vessels actually have no purpose, then my conclusion will break down. We can't really say that S flew by flapping its wings. Or if flapping wings does not lead to blood to any heat generation, then my base is that the reason our blood vessels exist is because heat generated by flapping. Then also my reason goes down. Can you guys see this, folks? I can see 54 of you over here. Can you see that in either of these scenarios, my conclusion will break down? Yes, no, just. This is complex logic. This is one official question that has less than 20% accuracy overall. Okay, what are some of the assumptions over here? So this is an uber difficult question. All right, Omar says, I thought about the first few. So the assumption over here is that BVN does not serve a different purpose. Okay, the second assumption over here, is it doesn't exist without any purpose, so it does have a useful purpose. Okay, and for flapping of wings, it should lead to heat generation in S, just as it did in bats overall. Okay, again, I said there could be more falsification questions too that you could really just say, but these are the three assumptions that are over here. Okay, now let's translate each of the answer choices over here. So now remember, can you tell me what is the definition of an assumption? What's the definition of an assumption? How do we define an assumption? Because you're going to really see a lot of confusion with the answer choices here. How do we define an assumption? And let me get the stats for you over here. 19 of you chose this, 7 of you chose this, 6 of you chose this. 6 was choice B, 1 was choice C, and 1 person choice D over here. Okay. Something which is taken for granted, okay. Something that's thought to be true without any proof, okay. Well, these are not. Okay. An assumption is an unstated idea required for the conclusion. It's an unstated idea which is required for the conclusion to hold true. That's very, very important. Remember this. Whenever you have such questions, you have to go back to that fundamental definition. An unstated idea which is required for the conclusion to hold true. So you can really read this under the tag e-GMAT. Okay. Now let's talk about choice E over here. 19 of you chose choice E. What is my conclusion? What is my conclusion? Conclusion is that S flies by flapping. Right? Why? Because there are these blood vessels. Right? Everyone remembers this? S flies by flapping its wings. All right. Now let's look at what choice E says. Choice E says heat generated in flapping its wings could not have been dispersed by anything other than blood vessels. Is that something that is required to prove that S flapped his wings? Does this mean, let me just put in over here, what this choice is really saying is if S flapped its wings, right? What this choice is saying is if, let me just put this over here, if S flapped, then you generated heat which was dispersed by blood vessels. Does this mean, the question really is, does this mean that S flapped its wings? No, that's circular logic. Okay. It doesn't mean that S flapped its wings over here. And that's something that you've got to recognize. Let me just go through and show this over here. And then this also applies to choice B over here. So let's assume this plane called Bombardier. Bombardier. It's a luxury plane. It's a plane that billionaires have. So all people who buy a Bombardier are billionaires. I mean, it's the plane costs about $200 million. You've got to be a billionaire to be able to buy this. Now, does this mean that all billionaires buy a Bombardier? Does it mean that? The fact that people who buy a Bombardier, they're billionaires, does it really mean that all people who are billionaires buy a Bombardier? Yes, no. Is that required? Is it must be true? No. So choice B says all creatures that fly by flapping their wings have networks of blood vessels. So the negated version of this is all creatures do not have networks. Some of them actually at least do not. So does it matter whether all creatures fly by flapping their wings have networks of blood vessels? Does it matter in this context? Why? Because we already know that S has this network of blood vessels. Is that a must be true? No, it's not a must be. It does increase my belief in the conclusion, but it is not required. Right? And that's the difference between a strengthener and an assumption, and this is an assumption question. Okay. Choice A, which is the correct answer, is saying that S would not have the network of blood vessels if it did not serve a useful purpose. Okay, which is required. Why? Because dissipating heat is a useful purpose. If the negation of this choice is S would have had, S can have blood vessels, and those blood vessels can have no useful purpose. If such is the case, what does it do to my conclusion? It breaks the conclusion down, right? If that happens, this negated statement over here breaks my conclusion down. Which confirms that this is my correct answer. This is deep logic. I will tell you up front. If you're beginning critical reasoning, this is not a question you should be solving. But if you want to hit to that 90th percentile, if you're already done with a good chunk of critical reasoning, you should be solving this question. At the same time, you can really see how this is messing up with your brain. Okay. At the same time, you can also really see how this one is very different, very similar to the incorrect answer choices in questions 1 and 2, where what this is talking about is that, hey, the flapping is already happening, whereas the conclusion is talking about whether S flaps its wing. This thing, the flapping is already happening, and to really say, hey, you need then, and the heat generated by flapping can only be dispersed using those blood vessels. In the same way, you remember question 1 really said, hey, what else can we do to improve the condition of non-fair trade coffee farmers? So it's kind of in that similar context, and you can really see how, if you don't focus on A, understanding the answer choice, and 2, putting it in the context of what the argument is asking, it forces your brain to make mistakes. Okay, so this was the last question that we're going to solve today. We are already an hour and a half into the session over here. I hope you guys found this session useful. If you guys like this session, then do, and if you want to see more sessions such as this one, you guys can show your appreciation using the like button and let GMAT Club know. Also, I'm sharing the session PDF. You can download this. Also, if you guys want to, let's go to slide 40. If you guys want to learn critical reasoning right from the very basics to getting to that advanced level and assumption, register for the assumption webinar this weekend if you've not already registered for the same. So here is the link to register for the assumption webinar. And in the end, if I could get, oh, this is the wrong PDF, it belongs to the Marcy webinar. My bad, guys. Hold on. Harsha, can we, how, oh yeah, this is RC webinar. Sorry about that. Harsha, can we get the link to the PDF? Or actually, you know what? Give me 1 second, I can do that. While I'm getting you the link, if you guys can give some feedback on the webinar, that would be really good. Okay. All right. And Harsha has the link over here. Thank you, Harsha. Guys, you'll have to copy paste this link, or I can highlight it over here as well. Just give me 1 second. I can share that link over here. And for those of you, yes, I do have the link over here. Let me show the link so you can download the webinar as download the PDF as well. It has the solution to the last question. Okay, guys, feedback, and again, there are assumption. There are free video lessons on assumption as well as on boldface in our free trial. You can go to the e-GMAT free trial and log in and get to that. Let me actually give you a link to the e-GMAT free trial as well. Here's the link to free trial registration that you guys can register for. Okay, any other feedback? And again, thank you for liking the webinar. I truly appreciate that. With that, I want to thank you guys for joining me today, and I wish you good luck for your learning. Have a good evening.